This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 354 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's episode is simply about saying yes. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm lucky to be recording this podcast episode today. So, saying yes. There's lots of cases where we might want to say yes or might be worried about saying yes to interesting opportunities or to things where we might feel a bit apprehensive or scared but think maybe yes would be a good choice. I try to say yes to lots of things in daily life and when I'm traveling, but I do think that when we travel, we're often struck by more chances, I guess, than in daily life to say yes to things that we might not normally do. It is something that's definitely happened to me over and over on my travels, and I'm definitely not suggesting you go out saying yes to crazy risky things. But if you get an interesting invitation or, a chance to try something you've never tried, I think it's very much worth considering saying yes. I have tons of examples from my travels, but I guess the most impactful, the biggest one I can think of, was in my late 20s. I was traveling across Russia, headed to an English teaching job in Prague that started at the end of the summer. Super excited about living and working in Prague. It was 2003. Prague had just recently become known as, a really cool place to visit. So I thought, living there would be amazing. However, at an internet cafe en route, somewhere in the Baltics, I think, I got an email from the school that had hired me saying, oops, sorry, we have overhired. We don't need you, but we do also have a school in Bratislava. Would you like to teach there? And I honestly could not even vaguely place Bratislava on a map, but in the spirit of just saying yes, because, what else was I going to do? Well, why not? Here's an interesting, different opportunity. I said yes and ended up spending a year living in Bratislava, one of the very best experiences of my life. And just quietly, I think it actually worked out way better than living in Prague. So there you go. That's one of my favorite say yes stories. And today I have stories from 3 guests who have said yes to some really interesting opportunities and chances that came their way. We start off with Klein, who was spending some time in Colombia when he got an invitation that he bravely said yes to.
I was in the La Guajira Peninsula in northern Colombia. So it's this crazy desert region right on the border with Venezuela. It's peopled by this group called the Wayu. So it's a native group. They really resisted colonization for a long time. They're fiercely independent, matrilineal. It's a really interesting society. And for the most part, these guys are herders. They've got sheep herds, some cattle, but not a lot grows out there. And they've had a lot of dry years with climate change and stuff. What I do now is I look for traditional forms of art. And so I'm down there meeting with these groups and trying to build relationships, getting to know who they are, what they do. This is actually my 3rd trip that time and my 3rd time visiting this specific family. And I'm finally getting sort of deep into the culture. I'm being more accepted, getting invited to more stuff. And just sort of casually on what was originally going to be the last day hanging out with them, the matriarch of this particular family is like, hey, if you're going to be hanging around for another day, do you want to come to another village and maybe do some filming there? Yeah, sure. I got time. I'm at the end of my trip, not really doing anything else. I don't think much of it, but I wake up early the next morning, head out at I think 7 o'clock. They pick me up in their pickup truck. At first, they don't really know where they're going. First, we go back to their village for a while, pick up some more people. It becomes a bit of a caravan with some motorcycles and some more cars. We go back into town and grab supplies. And then we're just sort of asking random people for directions. This is 2 hours later. So we're maybe like half a mile from where I started the journey today.
And you have no idea what's going on, but you kind of would have hoped your host
no
had
idea
some
what's going
idea.
on.
But
yeah, basically, I trust them at this point. It's been a while. So, if this was a newer relationship, I might have been a little more concerned, but I'm like, what's going to happen is going to happen. It'll be fine. Finally, they figure out where they're actually going. And so we pull off the road and onto this dirt track. You're just passing through all these like cactus groves and small scraggly trees and stuff. And we break out of this dense cover into this clearing of a small village of like their traditional huts and stuff. And there's a bunch of folks gathered in small groups. They're giving the gringo the eye. It's a little bit of a surprise that I'm here. This was around the time that I figured out that I was going to a second funeral. So, so in Wayuu culture, it's really fascinating. I want to get to talk to them more about it, but I've had the chance to talk with them for a few hours about some of their cultural traditions and stuff. And one of the more interesting ones is burial practices. They need to bury someone immediately after they die. So if a normal death happens, it's within 24 hours in their home soil. If it's a violent death, it's instant. Like they show up, they dig a hole, they put the body in.
wow.
But that means that there isn't time for like a normal funeral. And so what they'll do is after that very small gathering that time, many years later, in this case, it was around 15 years. Years, yeah. So I had never even been to Colombia when the original funeral happened. I have no idea who this person is.
Okay.
But years later, sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes it's 15. It just depends. They couldn't give me a good answer on exactly why a certain time is chosen, but they'll dig them back up. So they will go and exhume the body, and then they will rebury it and have sort of a celebration. So people from all over the region, from all the different clans in the area, will come and gather, and sort of it's a big camp out. Right. So I'm realizing that I'm in kind of deep here. And who knows if they'd let anyone know they were bringing me along.
Yeah.
So, I'm getting some sidelong glances. This is not really a part of the world that gringos show up a lot in, and I'm a pretty standout dude. I've got kind of reddish beard and blonde hair.
I was just going to say for my listeners, you don't look Colombian. Yeah, exactly. It would be hard to pass. Yeah.
No, not passing at all. And on top of this, they speak a strong mix of like Spanish and their local Wayuu Nike.
Okay.
So I can't understand what the heck is getting said between the people in this village and the people I'm hanging out with. Anyway, they make some decisions, and we end up following this guy out on a dirt track. Our whole little caravan follows him, and he just sort of points to a little offshoot off the dirt road, and that's our spot. The guys hop out, grab some shovels, and they're like uprooting cactus and making space in this clearing for the whole party. And basically what's happening is it's like car camping with the Wayuu. Every little clan that comes down to visit for the ceremony gets their own little patch, and they got to kind of clear it out and make room, and then they hang out and they've got their spot. And everyone goes around and says hey to everyone. They're getting the space set up, and everyone's going around setting up hammocks to lounge in, and then there's like a little ring of mostly just cheap plastic chairs getting set up as well. And so interspersed with like strong tradition, there's these little pieces of just foreign imports of cheap plastic chairs and stuff like that, and that kind of incongruous stuff is always funny. Yes. But they start doing some like fairly basic ceremonies, like coffee's very important in the culture. And there's a hierarchy that I don't fully understand at this point, but they sort of go around and each person takes a drink. And right about now, they're dragging a cow out to a tree behind us, which is going to be dinner. As we've come through this whole area, I'm just watching pretty much every single group is either in the process of killing a goat or a cow or cleaning the animal and like starting to cook. Like it's just surrounded by the preparations for, I guess, barbecue. So yeah, they slaughtered a whole cow, and they took like 8 people to tie it up to the tree and like go through the whole process. Not going to go into that here.
Thank you.
Don't think everyone wants to hear that. Then like each piece of meat gets hung up in a tree while they're preparing like the cooking area, digging a pit to make a fire and just putting the cookware up and stuff. And then most of us just go back to our little clearing and lounge in hammocks for a while.
Nice.
And of course, they just start breaking out the alcohol.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. So, one guy has self-appointed to be the alcohol pourer, and there's just like little clear soda bottles full of firewater.
I can imagine.
Throughout the day, other groups, other clans would come up and sort of introduce themselves. And you'd go through a circle, and it was almost like two teams after a match doing the handshakes, passing through, like giving respects. And I was a little relieved that I didn't get to see a body.
I was just going to ask you what happened with the reburial situation.
Yes. No, the entire day I was stressed out about
I can
that.
imagine.
I'm sitting here like, am I going to make some sort of major social mistake? They've invited me with no preparation. I've got a camera and recording equipment. Like, what's okay to film? What's not? Like, how do you, please God, tell me if I'm making a mistake? Luckily, they told me that on the second day they do that for a much smaller group. So really, I didn't need to worry about it the whole time.
What a fascinating experience, which arose purely from Carl just saying yes to an invitation from people he'd got to know and trusted. And he experienced something that's very much not in any tourist brochure, and nor should it be, I think. My next guest is Tracy Collins, and Tracy has a story that reminds us basically what one simple yes can lead to across your lifetime. Now, funnily enough, while I was editing, it didn't occur to me while I was chatting with Tracy, but I realised that Tracy's life-changing yes was in response to a small newspaper advert. And that, funnily enough, is also how I came to live in Japan, from seeing a newspaper ad. And it made me think probably that's rarely these days a way that people have a say yes moment. I'm imagining not much arises from newspaper ads these days. Confess, I haven't really seen a physical newspaper for a while. But I love this story of Tracy's.
So in 1994, actually the end of 1993, I moved to Botswana. My parents had moved from South Africa to Gaborone in Botswana, and I went to visit. And I just actually completed a TEFL course in Newcastle. So I was qualified to teach English as a foreign language. So I pitched up at their doorstep, as you do, at the end of November 1993, and decided I wanted to stay. I was there for about a month, and I went, this is really cool. Want to explore more of Botswana. Want to get to know the people, the culture. It's different from South Africa, so decided to stay. Anyway, my mum came back from work this day with a local magazine, and in it, every week it had adverts. And my mum had spotted an advert for a family looking for an English teacher. So it was a tiny advert. It was literally 2 or 3 lines long, and it was from a South Korean family who had moved from Seoul to live in Botswana. And they'd actually been in the far north of Botswana and then had moved to Gaborone because Mr. Shin owned a garage at that point in Gaborone. And the girls, I think at that point, were 4 and 5, and they needed to have English to be able to apply to get into a school. And their only language was Korean. That's what they spoke. So Mum said, go for it. Brilliant. You need to do some work while you're here. You just can't live off us. So I went, okay. So bearing in mind, I hadn't taught before. I'd done my TEFL, but I was a bit nervous. And I thought, well, there's no resources. What am I going to do? There's nothing here. There's that one bookshop in Gaborone. Anyway, I thought, no, let's just go for it. I answered the advert, phoned. It was Mr. Shin, who said, come round to the house and we'll have a chat and we'll interview you. So went round the next day. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up being the English teacher for the 2 girls. So G-Min and G1 at that point were 4 and 5 years of age. I went every afternoon for an hour, Monday to Friday, spent an hour with the girls, teaching them English. And over the space of just weeks and months, I just kind of assimilated into the family. So I would go, and Jongmin, the mum, there'd be lunch for me. I'd teach the girls, and then I'd stay on a little bit longer. The lesson was like I think it was between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. But they were like, no, come for lunch every day. So I used to love the Korean food. It was a great introduction. And at that point, I'd never been to Asia. So it was something, I'd lived in Europe, I'd lived in Africa, but I'd never been in Asia. So it was a kind of, wow.
It's like traveling without leaving home.
It was.
Yeah.
They tried to teach me to use chopsticks, which they're still doing because I'm absolutely useless at. Seriously terrible. Taught me some Korean. Anyway, I ended up teaching more of the family because more of the family moved to Botswana. So then I started teaching an aunt. She had a baby boy and a little girl at that point. So I used to go teach the girls, then I'd go around to teach the aunt. So that continued for maybe a year that I was there. And then I actually left Botswana. I went back to Europe. Went back about 6 months later because unfortunately my stepdad was actually seriously ill. So I went back to see him and to help my mum out. So of course picked up again with the family, and they'd had another English teacher at this point, but they were like, you're the best. You're the best. They did really great for my ego. You're the best. You were amazing.
We love you.
Yeah, they really were. And then I returned again it was probably about 6 years later, because my daughter by that point had been born and she was 5. So I took her back to meet the family. They dressed her up in Korean national dress. I've got a beautiful photo of her when she was 5 years of age, dressed up. And she just had a wonderful time meeting all the kids, because by this point, most of the family had moved from Korea and were living in Botswana.
Amazing.
So it was just fantastic. So we're talking now 94, 93, 94. Then my daughter was born in 96 and I went back in 2001. We kind of lost touch as the years go past, you do. And I think what happened is probably it would have been Facebook that we found each other again via Facebook. By that point, they'd moved to Australia. So they were living in Sydney and the girls had gone to uni in Australia in Sydney. So they'd settled there. What we didn't realise at this point is that we were going to end up in Australia too. So
isn't the world crazy?
So kind of over the years, I kept in touch following Mr. Shin was going backwards and forwards to Botswana, but they had kind of retired to Australia by that point. The girls had grown up. I mean, bearing in mind then they're mid-30s now. And then we got an invitation to Jimin's wedding. So she's the younger of the girls. So of course we were very excited. We know what happened in 2020. So of course they got married, but with 10 people there. And so we didn't manage to catch up with them. But then 2 years later, Jimin sent me a message on Facebook saying, we've rearranged, we're going to have the big wedding that we didn't have and we really want you guys to come. Aww. So it was in September, I think it was 2022. We flew down to Sydney, met the whole family again, watched Jimin get married. It was wonderful. Met the aunt that I taught and the baby boy who is now 30.
Oh my goodness.
And the daughter, she's a teacher and he just got married. And there's a great photo where I'm sitting on the sofa in Gaborone and the little girl's sitting next to me and I'm sitting with the baby on my knee. And we recreated that photo at the wedding.
I love that.
Which was just so much fun. And so, from all of this, from answering an advert, not only have we stayed in touch throughout the years, we're still friends. Jimin now has a little baby, Roy. Whenever I go down to Sydney, I always meet up with them and see how they are. We keep in touch on Facebook. So we're all part of we're just all part of the family with them now.
So
and
nice.
It's just, and I still remember my mum bringing me that advert and showing it to me and saying, you should apply. And me thinking,
oh no,
how am I going to do this? I won't be very good. I don't want to do this. You're having that kind of self-doubt that you sometimes have with doing something that you've not done before. So I was like, no, I don't want to do it. But, if I hadn't said yes,
you would have been missing all of this rich part of life, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And a couple of years ago, I actually made it to South Korea. I'd wanted to go for so long.
Having learnt so much about it.
So it was so exciting to actually arrive in Seoul. And it was just so lovely to kind of put all of that, everything I'd learned about South Korea and about the Korean people. And it just was so lovely. I kind of felt a bit at home. It was, I know it's a very different culture, but I'd just been experiencing it for so long.
I love that story. And it just seems so random. Like, how did the family initially end up in Botswana? I can't imagine there's like a lot of Koreans moved to Botswana, or?
I don't think so. And I think at that point, the economy was not good in South Korea.
Right.
So I think a lot of Koreans were looking for work elsewhere. Okay. And so Mr. Shin owned a garage. So he owned a garage in Gaborone, but I think initially he went to work for a garage somewhere way remote in the bush in Botswana before he then got the garage in Gaborone and then was running that. So yeah, I know. It's
what
crazy.
A brave man. That seems crazy.
Yeah. I know, to move his wife and 2 small children.
Yeah.
To
from Seoul to rural Botswana.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It does seem like Mr. Shin, the South Korean father, was also someone who said yes to interesting opportunities too, I think. Tracy sent me a couple of photos from the time to share, so do check the show notes for those. My final guest today is Chiara Barbera, and Chiara had wanted to go and have a long-term stay in Italy, her parental heritage, since she was a child. She had family members there. She'd had some trips there with her parents, but in her 20s, she thought it's time. She bought a one-way ticket and headed off to Italy to sightsee for a bit and stay with cousins. So this was an adventure Chiara had longed for a lifetime.
And while I was on that adventure, I had moments where I was like, what am I doing? Like, what's next? Because this is what I'd been like waiting for my whole life. And then it was during a moment when we were doing a tradition that's called il maiale, which means the pig in Italian. Basically, what they do is they get a pig that's been like prepared, and they take it from like stout to hooves. They prepare everything, so nothing gets wasted. What they do is they prepare like sausages, they prepare prosciutto, they prepare salami, they chop up pieces of the meat and they conserve that for another time. They actually make the lard as well, so like the pig fat, and they use that to preserve food. They use it for cooking. It's an incredible experience, and I highly recommend it to anyone that's interested. But basically, we got there early in the morning and they were starting to prepare everything, and people were making like, they would get these pieces of the meat and they would make the sauce, and we sat down at about lunchtime and we had this big long lunch, and it went for hours, and there was like homemade wine that was free flowing, and it was just lovely. Like, it was just a classic like long like lunch with this big long table, and we were eating. And then after we finished eating, the lady that hosted us, she was my cousin's mother-in-law, and she really just took a shining to me because I just loved everything. And every time they were doing traditions, I was like, can I come? Can I do this? So she looks at me and after lunch, and she goes, okay, we need to go and wash the budelli. Who's going to come with me? And when you're learning another language, like I'm very fluent in Italian, but like there's some words that you just don't learn. Like
you haven't needed them in life.
No, to that point. You would just never learn. And I was like, I'll do it. And so we go outside.
You don't know what it is.
No idea. But I was like, yes, like it's an experience. So we went outside and we walked over to the sink, and she's like, okay, here they are. And I looked down and I was like, okay, like these are pigs' intestines, like the sausage casings, basically, what you use to make sausages. And my cousin walks past and he's like, your hands are going to smell. And I was like, great. So anyways, we were standing at this sink and it was just me and her because no one else wanted to do this job. It was like probably the worst job of them all. And we're washing the pig skins to make sure that like they're ready for the sausages. It was literally in that moment where I looked at this lady who was just talking to me about how when she was younger, she used to do this with her family and all of her fond memories and the reason why she keeps it going. And it was in that moment where I was like, oh my goodness, like I love this so much. I said, but what's going to happen when this lady doesn't do these traditions anymore? Like no one is here with us washing the pig skins. Like, do people even know how to wash the pig skins? And I was like, wow. And that was kind of when it really hit me. And ever since that moment, that's my travel story. And ever since that moment, I was like, okay, I've made it my mission to try and save Italian traditions.
I think that is beautiful.
Thank you.
We need lots of people to do that. And did your hands stink after?
Well, no, because it's a myth. So she gave me lemon, and like you like washed your hands with lemon, and then it got rid of the stink.
It's gone.
Yeah, it was fine. I was like, guys, I was like, you're such babies. I know, he was teasing.
Yeah.
He was teasing me, but it worked well because she invited me for everything else that she did that year. So I was like, great. You just got to say yes. You never know where it will lead.
Exactly. I think that's so true of many, many situations. Say yes and worry later about what
if your hands will smell
or whatever you're just signed up for. Yeah. Nearly all the time, it works out great.
Yes, that's a good disclaimer. Nearly.
What a beautiful outcome from Chiara saying yes to one small adventure, a sausagey adventure, and getting to have a whole lot more and a whole business out of it, which I'll mention in the links to come. So that is all I have for episode 354 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope you are feeling inspired to go out there and say yes even more. Huge thank you to my guests. I started off chatting with Klein of Lost Canyon Imports. So Lost Canyon Imports is his online store. He's connecting artisans in out-of-the-way places like that part of Colombia he described with consumers in the US and beyond. You can find out more at lostcanyonimports.com. Also, big thanks to Tracy Collins. Tracy has two fabulous podcasts, the UK Travel Planning Podcast and Global Travel Planning Podcast, uktravelplanning.com and globaltravelplanning.com, and anywhere you find good podcasts. And finally, I chatted with Chiara Barbera, and she has this fabulous platform, the Assaggio platform, experience-assaggio.com, which is where she is collecting all of this fabulous knowledge from the older Italian generations she knows so that we can also share this amazing knowledge and culture. Don't forget to come and sign up for the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at Substack. You can get that at thoughtfultravel.substack.com, and come along and join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in those platforms if you're not already there having fun with us. All of these links and more will be in the show notes for this episode. You can find them at notaballerina.com/354. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.